This is video number 3 in Unit 1 for AP Statistics, and we're going to talk about how to describe a graph, particularly dot plots, histograms, stem and leaf plots, and box plots. I wanted to start out with showing you what each of these graphs looks like, and so first we have a dot plot, and this particular dot plot lists categorical variables. And the dot plot we created a couple days ago with the hiring discrimination simulation was quantitative data or numerical data. The next one we have here is a histogram, and histograms are much like bar graphs or bar charts, and usually with a histogram, as this one, there's no space in between the adjacent columns. And so here's how you read a histogram. The columns are positioned over a label that represents a quantitative variable. And remember, quantitative is the same thing as numerical variables. The column label can be a single value or a range of values. In this particular example, we have a range of values. And the height of that column indicates the size of the group defined by the column label. Next we have a stem and leaf plot, and it's much like a histogram, except that a histogram shows how observations are distributed across a whole group, and so the stem and leaf plot shows what the histogram can't, and it shows an individual observation. So this particular stem plot contains a key, and sometimes they do, to help people understand how to read the data. So this key indicates that the stem over here of 110 and a leaf of 7 would indicate a score of 117 for an IQ. Next is a box plot. We sometimes refer to these as box and whisker plots, and it's another way to display numerical data. In this particular picture we have one that's skewed to the right, a symmetric one, and one that's skewed to the left. Now in yesterday's video I mentioned briefly about how when you describe graphs you have to describe 3 parts of the graph, and the first is the center. Graphically, the center of a distribution is the point where about half of the observations are on either side. It's easy to find the center in a distribution that's symmetrical, but sometimes we have to employ a measure of central tendency in order to find the center. And we're going to get more into that as we move on in our study of statistics. The spread of a distribution refers to the variability of the data. And variability means just how spread out is the data. Is it really close together around a single value, or is it a wide range of values? And so later on we'll employ something like the range, which you should be familiar with, and then we'll talk about standard deviation and the interquartile range. All of those terms and topics will help us in discussing the spread and determining variability. The shape of the distribution is also something that we have to discuss when considering how to describe a graph. So we've done center, spread, and now shape, and we really went in depth on this on the last video. We referred to a uniform, a symmetrical, what skew was, and we talked about bimodal, unimodal, and multimodal then. The last way we describe a graph is through something that happens that's out of the ordinary. And we refer to these out of the ordinary occurrences as outliers. That's when you have data that's all close together except for maybe 1 or 2 points of data that are far away from the norm on your graph. Whenever we're describing a graph by talking about the center, the spread, the shape, and unusual things, you always have to remember to talk about it within the context of the problem. If you don't talk about the problem and you just talk about what center is or what spread is without even ever relating it to the problem, you haven't addressed what you need to address to do so. And this part about using correct statistical vocabulary is very important, especially as we prepare this year for the AP exam. If you just start throwing out words because you know that they're related to statistics, you don't get any credit for that kind of stuff. They would rather you explain something without using statistical vocabulary if you don't really know what those words mean. Because if you throw out a word and it doesn't make any sense within the context of what we're talking about, that actually deducts from your score. And it's important to use complete sentences also, because they want to know that you can portray your argument or your answer in a complete way. Okay, this picture gives us two dot plots to compare, and we're comparing the number of pets owned between Block A and Block B. As we look at Block A, most households have either 0 or 1 pet, and it decreases the further you go. If we look at Block B, it kind of has a bell shape to it. In Block A, we're skewed to the right. Remember, it looks like your right foot. And like I said, Block B is more bell-shaped. And so there's more variability in Block B distribution, and there's no point on here that's really an outlier or gap in either of these data sets. Alright, now we have a stem plot, or stem and leaf plot. They're referred to both ways. And these are kind of like a dot plot on its side almost, except using numbers. And so each of these is roughly bell-shaped. Okay, so they're similar in that aspect. The difference is the girls are clumped more together and have less variability than the boys. Weekend's just around the corner.